In some ways, COVID-19 has actually made traveling in Thailand a bit better. Not saying that I don't want this thing to be over. It'd be interesting to do a comparison before COVID-19 and during it. This video is more of a comparison between before COVID and currently during the time of COVID-19. I am not trying to teach you how to avoid the law or how to work around through like the gaps in terms of how to travel around here in Thailand. Also, if you're one of those people who want to come here and not take the vaccine because you just want to avoid putting poison in your body, here's an answer for you guys. Don't come. So let's start with, the starting of COVID-19 in general. When this place started lockdown, I gained so much weight from just staying at home all the time. I ended up having to stay at the apartment the entire time because a lot of places were so shut down that you couldn't leave without being, confronted by the police in some sort of way. Other areas were not as strict. Other areas were even more strict than where I was at. But I just remember just having to stay at my apartment, only leaving to go to the 7-Eleven, coming back, and doing this over and over again for like a long time, which is why I gained so much weight. But now let me tell you my experience about when things started opening up, like a few months later. While everywhere else, specifically in the United States, was going through a lot of turmoil and all that, here things started opening up just a bit. During that time, I found that most of my travels were pretty extensive. I was able to travel to Phetchabun, to Ayutthaya quite often actually. I was able to go to Chiang Mai. Later on I would go to Pattaya. I would go to Phang Nga, or I would go to Khao Sok. I went to a lot of places for about up until January. The more expensive hotels and resorts and restaurants that I would never go to on a regular basis except for the event of a pandemic have now dropped their prices almost like 80%. I was able to do so fairly freely, but I still had to wear a mask. And obviously everywhere you go, you'd obviously have to, scan to see if you have a fever of any kind. And this is even though at this time there was no cases of COVID at this time. The other thing too that's fantastic is all these beautiful sites that you would see a lot of tourists go to, cramming together to take pictures, are now almost completely empty. I mean, I'm literally able to take a clear shot of some major spots. Let's take Phuket for example. There's the old city of Phuket, which is usually crammed with a lot of tourists. I literally felt like for a good 5 minutes, me and my girlfriend were able to walk down that street and just only see people who were working there for a little while, which is tragic in the sense for the community, but at the same time, it's almost like there's a big breath of air where I can just walk down this area. So let me take a comparison of Chiang Mai, Phuket, and a few other places that were initially packed with foreign tourists, but right now are not so much. Phuket is a good example, and I actually never went to Phuket before COVID. But on the ironic side is when I went there during COVID, everything that everybody was talking about how much of a party island it was and all that, yeah, I saw none of that. For the most part, if you were an expat who lives there, or if you were just a local that lives in the area, that's what you would see. And most hotels were either closed down, most restaurants were closed down. It's not even close to what I've been hearing about. In the area of Chiang Mai, there's a similar thing that I saw. Most of the places that tourists would go to were closed down, most of them, mind you. However, places that expats would frequently go to and spend their money, those places were still open. On top of it, Chiang Mai is still a big enough city that they can still rely on some Thai tourism as well. For instance, when I went up the mountain to Doi Inthanon, it was almost like 100% Thai people in that area, except for myself. So I'm not gonna lie, if any of you guys come down here to Thailand and you're expecting to see all these restaurants that maybe your friends have talked about, there's a good chance that some of them might not come back. So let's talk about the third wave, all right, and what it's been like traveling for that situation. So it's slightly different than when the first time came around. Last time, the very first time we were in lockdown, it was almost claustrophobic. Now this also has been helpful to me because I've moved to a new location. I'm actually right next to a market and everything, so it's not just me going from my apartment to 7-Eleven all the time. It's a little bit better in that case. But at the same time, it's still a bit more of a lockdown in the sense that I do teach online still at this point. Now it's starting to lighten up a bit. Even though the cases are still statistically pretty high, we're able to go to restaurants as long as we're scanned, as long as we wear masks, and that we sit fairly distant from each other. The best thing that I did so far in the last few days is that I went to Bayok Tower with my girlfriend for our anniversary. We were able to go in and sit by ourselves pretty much with this perfect view of the city and be able to eat a full, I think a 3-course dinner. I think it felt like it was more than 3 courses. It was quite filling actually, for a fairly inexpensive amount, for about 3,000 baht, which is, for what we had there, that is fairly cheap. That being said, we still had to reserve ahead of time, we still had to check in, we still had to make sure that we got scanned and everything that, and for the most part we wore our masks up until the food showed up. But anyway, that's pretty much it. I mean, that's what it's been like, traveling around here. Some things are interesting in comparison. I do say that I do like some of these areas more so that tourists aren't around. And once tourists come back, and I do want them to come back for the sake of this country, I am going to miss those areas that are going to be flooded with tourists, because I once had them to myself, and other people who have not had that opportunity probably will never have that opportunity unless something like this happens. That being said, I really can't wait for this pandemic to be over, obviously. Anyway, everyone, thank you very much for watching my channel. Please sure to subscribe, hit that bell, and like this video and make sure to leave a comment to tell me about your experiences either traveling to a different country during COVID-19, or even here in Thailand, if you've had anything different than I've experienced. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Sawasdee krap.